Okay, well, I am here with the gorgeous, stunning, amazing Katrina Kittle. Thank you so much, Katrina, for being willing to do this. Our very first selection for the Cool
I'm
Creative
honored.
Book Association of Badass Women, which is not our official title, but
It
perhaps
should
should
be.
be. I'm going to put that
Yeah.
for a vote after this. And this month, we have read Morning in This Broken World, um, a glorious novel, in my completely biased opinion. And I am so glad that you were willing and able to do this with us so we can show this
Right.
at our next book club meeting, which will be here at the new house. And I'm nervous and excited for that. But I'm really excited to be able to talk to you and then to share this with all of the other amazing women in the club. So thank you so much.
Yay. I would do anything for you, Wendy, but I'm jealous they get to see your gorgeous house before I do.
Thank you. But yes, let's plan that soon.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have some questions that they've sent. I have a lot of other questions that I would like to ask, and I do have the benefit of knowing you and having known you for many years now, um, back in our younger days,
I know.
a little bit younger anyway.
A little
And
bit.
and so reading the book for me was such a wonderful way to reconnect with you, I think, on a personal level. And so that was a really beautiful experience for me. So I also have some questions for you and hopefully some things that we can share with the rest of the women. So, first off, the feedback that I have gotten so far from the book club members who have read and are reading it has been wonderful. They love it. Just the general consensus is that it's wonderful. And I know that you're wonderful, so that's all great. But one of the questions from Diane, who started the book club, and I really love that this is the first question because it's a big one. It's kind of a doozy. She says, Katrina, I really enjoyed the book and thank you for writing it. In this book, you deal with thoughts of suicide, Alzheimer's, loss of a spouse, homelessness, single parenting, illness, LGBTQ issues, genetic disorder, drug addiction, child separation, and COVID. Why did you choose to cover so many life challenges in one story?
Because they're not really choices
Mm,
sometimes when you start telling a story. But part of what inspired this one was, I don't know, in Ohio, our governor's Mike DeWine, and during the COVID lockdown, we had Wine with DeWine. Every afternoon, he would give a press conference and talk about what was going on. And he would, and this is in the early days when we're all still terrified. This will answer the question, I swear, even though it sounds like I'm veering off. Um, he would always end by saying, we'll get through this together. We're all in the same boat. And then this little meme started floating around on Facebook saying, we are not on the same boat. We are in the same storm, but some of us have yachts and some of us have canoes and some of us are drowning. And that really struck me and was part of the inspiration for the book because my own pandemic experience was super easy. My job was not in jeopardy. As a writer, being asked to stay home is a gift, like, and not to trivialize how horrible it was. But you know, I had a very easy pandemic experience, but that meme about we're in the same storm but not in the same boat made me start thinking about all the people for whom, who were having a very different pandemic experience than I was. And I was trying to picture, like, what are all the different boats? So Vivian kind of came from my dad, who we lost my mom in January of 2020. He was living in an assisted living community, which was great and took really great care of everyone, but um it was so lonely. Like, so here he is in a brand new apartment, he's recently lost his wife, and now he's going to be completely isolated. He can't go to the dining hall, there's no social activities. And that facility was amazing, but it was still really hard. So that's one boat. And then I started thinking about the nursing assistants who helped take care of my mom and took care of my dad, and they don't get paid enough, and yet they were essential. And suddenly they're risking their lives to come in and take care of people. So that's where Luna came from. And then I was teaching at University of Dayton, and we went completely online. But I was hearing all these stories, and that was bad enough for college students, but for younger students, K through 12, there were students who lost complete their whole social network, right? And were very lonely and developed all kinds of social issues. Students like Cooper, who was grateful to be removed from all that bullying and harassment, all those things. And then Dara, my dear friend Dara, has cerebral palsy. And she was also sharing with me another boat that I wasn't aware of, where she goes to occupational therapy, physical therapy several times a week. And all those things were canceled. And her therapists were trying to help her online, and her family members would try to help her do her stuff like through videos with these people remotely. And it really shrank her world. And she had physical issues, like physical setbacks, because of all of this. And so I was really trying to show, even though I don't think of it as a pandemic novel per se, but really trying to think of it as all these different boats. And so it was kind of, once I started on that route, then it was all these different issues, but for one major theme, hopefully major point.
I think that's amazing. And you kind of answered the follow-up question, which is, how did you get to the heart of these issues? How did you really hone in on these? And you've kind of answered this. So much of it is your experience, and then the experience of the people around you. And I think you've always been that person, from my perception, that you've had this, wide and wonderful network of human beings around you. And you draw so much from them, from their experiences, and see things through their vision. So can you speak a little bit more to that, how you really kind of like got to the heart of all of these many issues?
Yeah, especially, I mentioned Dara, who was hugely helpful. And when I reached out to her, and see, this is why I joked early on with that first question about sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes characters come to you and they just are who they are, and you have to try to figure out and catch up. And I know that sounds really weird, but so I knew that Ren was in a wheelchair. And I knew, like, one of the people I knew in a wheelchair was Dara. I was like, and I knew she had cerebral palsy, and I just asked, could I talk to her? And she was so smart. She's amazing. She's also a writer. She said, you know what you need to do if you really want to understand Ren, because I told her all about Ren. She read chapters for me and stuff. She's like, you should shadow me. You need to follow me around a couple days and see what this is like.
Wow.
And that was so eye-opening. It was so eye-opening. Stuff we take completely for granted. Even though my dad has a muscle disease and has been, dealing with that disability most of my life. He rides a motorized scooter, but even so, I wasn't aware of, like, he's a little more mobile and able to do things even now than Dara is. And she's just so bold. She's just so amazing. And she told me the important thing for me, this is from her. She was like, she has to be a character. She can't just be the character of cerebral palsy. She's like, she needs to have her own wishes, her own dreams. And I was like, amen. That's why I'm talking to you. That's why I want to get this right. Help me get it right. Help me not mess this up. And I have to say, I'm always open to learning, that whole thing about when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
Working with her, I just became so aware of all this really outdated language I was using, really ableist language, they call it. And that was just so interesting to me, of like, oh, nobody says that anymore. You don't say handicapped. And so I tried to be really careful with who said that. Like, it was okay for Cal to say that, but not Cooper. Cooper would know better, and Luna would know better. Things like that. But then, with Vivian, and bringing in the addiction stuff. In other books I've dealt with addiction. I have some really dear friends who dealt with that. And Wendy, my life is full of the gays. I have so many friends.
Kind of life to have.
Yeah. So many friends who are all across that rainbow spectrum, and so I always try to just populate my stories with people who are in my world. So did I answer that? I think.
Absolutely. I think you did. And then it kind of segues into another question from another one of our members, Christy, who pulls no punches. And she wants to know this. As we're talking about diversity, she said she thought it was fascinating that there are no direct mentions of race in the book. And what I took from the book as I read it, there were maybe insinuations of race, enough that I assumed, I guess. I assumed Luna is Hispanic or Latina. I assumed that Malik is Black. I assumed that Stephen is Asian. Correctly or not, I don't know. But there aren't direct mentions, except for, I think, one that Stephen mentions when he's talking about things he hates. And racism is one, alongside homophobia and others. So, with all of these other issues that were dealt with really directly in the book, was that a choice not to talk about racism, or was it something you thought about as you were writing the book?
I did, and this is the first time this has come up, so I'm so excited. Kind of, so this has to do with my editor and some sensitivity readers they gave me at Lake Union, the publishing house.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot has changed, like in the publishing world,
Okay.
like that.
Interesting.
And so for instance, early on, I mentioned like even one of the doctors that Vivian sees, in Vivian's perspective, I said something like, you know, Indian woman, very beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, can you cut, you know, you get these notes back and you can always override them. But again, I always am open to learning and changing. And they were like, you know, her name makes it clear.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to necessarily overtly state it. Same with when Rin first sees Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And I originally said, you know, he looks Asian of some kind, or, you know, and instead we changed it to, they said, you know, find some, like, can she make a comparison to someone else she knows? And when I said, I forget his name, maybe Mr. Wu, her science teacher or something like that. It
Okay,
was
yes.
not a teacher. And it was like, so then it's like the cue for people to picture without it having to be specifically, is that doctor Pakistani or Indian? Is this
Yeah.
guy Korean or Chinese, or, you know, and just being a little more open. And then with Luna, it was so fascinating to me because when I wrote it, I pictured that entire family being white. And my editor was like, said something about how she was so shocked when Luna's last name was mentioned as Barlow because of Cal's last name, which is now no longer in the book. The last name is never mentioned. And I was like, well, but, and I said, she goes, I expected something more Hispanic. And I was like, oh, I didn't picture her as Hispanic. And she was like, really? And for a while, we talked about changing it. And I was thinking about maybe she's Filipino based on some of the foods that the grandmother made and things like that. And I've left some of that in, but I just really feel in this climate, I don't want to sound like I'm a chicken, but I'm like, I can't write about someone's experience that's not my own as a point of view character. I can have minor characters, like with Malik, we mentioned that he's from Ghana. He's got that Ghanaian accent, but he's not a point of view character. And so if I'm going to create a point of view character, it's a really tricky line these days because I want to populate books with diversity, but I also cannot speak for an experience that's not my own. Now, granted, I'm not gay and I write Cooper, I don't have cerebral palsy and I write Ren, and somehow that feels a little different than race.
Mm-hmm.
Race is still the one that's really especially tricky, and I just didn't feel like I had it. I it probably does sound like chickening out, but I was just like, I don't know enough to go this route. So I did a revision where she was Filipino, and then I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do this. And it was interesting because Dara read the book, my friend with cerebral palsy, who happens to be Black. She pictured Rin and Cooper, and you know, she pictured Luna as Black, and you pictured her as Hispanic.
Yeah.
I wrote her as white. And so I told my editor, I'm like, let's remove the last name. Dara thought, you know, Luna was Black and Cal was white and the kids were biracial.
Okay.
And I, you know, everybody was picturing, lots of different people have pictured different things. And I'm like, let's pull the last name and then people can picture what they want.
Yeah.
Because Dara loved seeing a little girl like her. And I'm like, oh, and then you pictured a certain thing.
Right.
And I'm like, let's just give people the freedom to see it how they want to see it without
Absolutely.
making it a thing. But it's really, this is very different these days. You have to tread very carefully. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm scared, but I am scared of offending people. I don't ever want to do that. That is never my goal. Like, and I wanted this book to lift people and give them hope. And so the last thing I wanted to do was clunkily do something that might give offense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we probably all pictured Cal as white. Am I right about that? Yeah. Yeah, we know. Maybe I'm assuming too much.
Nope, 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 nope.
I think there are a lot of things, a lot of people that we probably know that we see in Cal people, and
Yeah,
personality traits that we don't love in
yeah.
Cal, which I think makes him a really fascinating character.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's not bad.
he's not
He's
bad.
not a bad person. He's just really clueless, thoughtless, immature.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. As I said, the timing ended up working out perfectly because I sat on this book for such a long time. I bought it as soon as it released, and then I waited and I waited and I waited. And when I became part of this book club, I knew, as we were going to all bring our suggestions, that this was going to be one of mine, and that I wanted to wait until we were able to read it as a group together. And then we selected it for the very first one. So it was completely perfect. And then I waited a little bit longer because I wanted to be able to talk to you about it. And now we're doing that here today. And I just finished it this morning. So it was absolutely perfect. So it's so fresh in my mind. I feel like I just walked out of this world of Luna and Vivian. And the end was hard and beautiful,
No.
which is life, I think. Um, but we wanted to know, did you know the ending? Did you have that ending in mind before you started the book or as you were writing the book? When did the end come to you?
The end came probably halfway through the the first draft. So I didn't know exactly how it would end. I had these ideas in my head of like, do they all end up living together? Would that ever happen? Do, um, for a while I thought maybe Luna would die from COVID. And then I was like, oh, but that's weird. Like that suddenly, like that's a whole different story that Vivian suddenly has these kids. And why would she have them? Like, are surely the dad or grandparents would come forward, just playing around with what will work. And it's awful. They talk about kill your darlings, which doesn't necessarily mean directly kill a character, but I knew that there had to be a loss. And who is it going to be? So you don't always know, and you just keep writing. And the more you get to know them in the first draft, because the first draft for me is all about discovery. People joke the first draft is you just telling yourself the story. And then in revision, you put it together for readers. But in the first draft, you're really just kind of figuring out, what is this story? And I knew going in, my whole goal was to write an intergenerational friendship. That's what I was after. That was my goal to myself. And then just discovered all this other stuff about them as I wrote and started to see where this could go. And for me, Wendy knows this, everybody else in the group, I'm always the queen of overshare. So I've had breast cancer twice, and I'm here because of early detection. So with Vivian, I knew this idea, because this is everywhere. People who are caretakers for either elderly parents or sick kids or sick spouses, they don't take care of themselves. And it's always women who are doing this. It's almost always women. And they put their own care aside while they care lovingly for everyone else. And so it's not, I can spoil things because your group has read the whole
Yes,
book,
you're
right?
good.
So I'm here because of early detection, and Vivian's not here because she didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so that was really important to me, not to punish her by any means, but just to show people. And that's one of the questions in the reading group guide at the end of the book. As caretakers, Luna talks about doing the same thing, as she cares for her daughter, especially.
Mhm.
She joked, I haven't had a pap smear in 3 years. There's never time. There's always something else to do. There's always some other crisis, and that we're worth it and we have to take care of ourselves. So when that became clear to me, the whole breast cancer storyline, I was like, I felt really weird about that, especially after my own experience. But I'm like, I think this is where it needs to go.
Yeah,
And that suddenly opened up all these different avenues for the story's end for me.
that's great. I think as I just finished it this morning, and I was reading the end. You write, I don't know if graphically is the right word, in a very detailed way, Vivian's dying process, because you're writing it from her point of view.
Mhm.
That's a chapter that comes from her. That's a very intense scene of her in this beautiful place in the garden where she feels at peace. And you write physically, emotionally, what she's experiencing. Was that something that was difficult to write? And how did you get there in order to write it?
That's just pure imagination. Um, because the only death I've ever been present for was my grandmother's. But just talking with various people, you always hear about how your life flashes before your eyes. And I know there was one time in my life that I actually thought I might die, one and only time. That's a long story. Just the brief version, I almost drowned in the Gauley River on a whitewater rafting trip, was pinned against a rock and couldn't get myself above water.
Oh,
I
no.
obviously did. It was the only time in my entire life, even with the cancer scares, that I was like, this is it. This is how it happens. And it is true. You suddenly, it's like this series of like these freaky little flashes, go all these things that mattered. Um, and so I tried to capture that idea too of like they're not even like memories. They're just like these little snapshots that kind of literally flash, you know? And so I guess I pulled on that a little bit. And then just we had lost a really dear friend to pancreatic cancer about 4 years ago. And just, you know, little things like how she said everything hurt, like for Cooper to hold her hand, but our friend wanted to hold hands anyway. He'd admitted it hurts, but he still wanted that. He wanted to be here for all of it he could. Not wanting to take all the morphine that you were allowed to because you wanted to be awake, you know, that kind of stuff. So I stole a bunch of stuff from that too. Writers steal everything, like everything you're aware of, everything you're there for is like, it just, and you don't intentionally be like, oh, I'm going to use that. But as you're writing a scene, it's like those things come flooding forward of like, you were there and you were present and you paid attention, and here's where you can honor that moment, you know?
Beautiful. I think I said this a little bit, but when we talked before we started recording, that when I was reading the book, to me it felt like an Easter egg hunt through your world. Knowing you, that there were these nuggets just sprinkled throughout the book. And I've read your other books, and to me, for whatever reason, maybe many reasons, this feels like such a reflection of you, of your spirit and who you are. And I wanted to just mention a couple of those that other readers will not know, but I think are some important ones to know. And there would be a couple characters make appearances, both furry and human,
Oh, yes.
in the book anyway. And that would be Ox, the cat, and the brief cameo of Riley, the nurse, who you mentioned would be better suited name for a dog, maybe a peppy dog like a beagle.
Like a
So
beagle.
what can you tell us about Ox and Riley?
Yes. So Riley was our beagle. And that was just a fun thing. Since we now have another cat and another beagle, but at the writing of the book, Joey and my cat Joey, who's very much Ox, and Riley were no longer with us. So if Joey was going to be a part of it, I just felt like I had to somehow at least get her name in there. And that little joke. And so only people who know us would know that and recognize that. But so you're right, it is like this little Easter egg. But yeah, Joey, he's even in the acknowledgments. I had that cat for 14 of his 17 years, and he was truly my writing assistant. He would drape over my left arm, whether I was writing by hand or writing on the computer. And he was a big boy. He was like 15 pounds. He was not as big as Ox, but it's amazing I don't have carpal tunnel, because he was always just if I sat down to write, it was like a radar went off, and he could be anywhere in the house and he would come, he would sit in my lap. He was always there for the writing. So this is the last book that he will have done that. So anything any book that comes out after this one is without Joey. So I knew I needed him in here. Speaking of the cat is banging on the office door. She's like, why is this closed? I went in here. Um, she's wandered away though. But yeah, Joey, but there was also a huge cat named Ox that belonged to my friends Ted and Dave there. So Jason's letting her in the office. So now who knows what rumpus
Who
will
knows?
begin. She loves to knock things off the desk. But this cat was the biggest cat I'd ever seen, the one who was actually named Ox. He was like a walking footstool for real. So I give him lots of Joey's personality, the bigness of Ox. I mean, that cat was probably 30 pounds. It was not healthy, but he was so friendly and cool. And then at my dad's facility where we moved my mom when she had dementia, there was a resident who had a cat named Hootie who wandered the halls very much like he does in this story. So he's kind of the combination of three cats, but mostly Joey.
Okay. It was wonderful to read it because I've met Joey many years ago, and he's
Yes. Many
what a
times.
what a personality on an
Yeah.
animal, and I think you've always said that and felt that with Joey, that he is a soulmate in a way.
Yeah. He really was a very good friend. He was
Yeah.
probably the feline love of my life.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of cats in my life. He was something special, and almost everyone who met him thought so.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I felt about the book, that not only was I on this Easter egg hunt through Katrina's world, it also felt to me like a love letter to Dayton. Um,
Oh,
and Dayton is where you and I met, and you are still there or near. Um, Dayton feels like an extra main character in the book. And I probably am reading it through that lens specifically. But so many of the Dayton mentions, that we found in the book. I think there was a call out to Esther Price at one point.
yeah, it's never
Yes.
mentioned by name, but yeah, she talks about the chocolate shop right down the street from where her mom works. So I
Mhm.
never, I give that's down the street from Tin Wilmington where my dad lives, but I call it Sycamore Place. And yeah, Dorothy Lane Markets and things like that. It is a love letter to Dayton, but it's also a love letter to this whole messy, disastrous world we're in. And like the title comes from a Mary Oliver poem. It in her poem Invitation, there's a line that says, "It is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world." And I'm like, the world is so broken. And yet there's these moments of beauty and joy that only come when we connect with each other, right? And we come together and lift and support each other. And that may sound really cheesy, but that's how I live my life. That's what I believe, right? And so I'm like, it is a serious thing. So it is kind of my love letter to all of the disaster, dumpster fire we seem to be living in.
That is the most perfect segue into the last, or one of the last questions, because I want to give you enough time to talk about this, which you just did. And that is this idea of community. It's something that we hear a lot now, kind of post-pandemic. There's a lot of talk about community. It's kind of a buzzword. But you knew then that this was really a primary focus of the book. And you really built the book around this idea of found family and community. And how did you get to that point? How did you decide that community was going to be such a major focus of the story?
I think that came from Cooper, although that is in almost all of my books. And I'm just peeking at the time. Okay, so
Yep.
I know how much I can I can wander. But that, yeah, found family is a part of all of my novels. But I think Cooper's obsession with apocalypse stories, which is very much mine. That's another Easter egg in there. I love The Walking Dead. But what has always fascinated me in apocalypse stories are like who keeps their humanity and who doesn't. Who are we when civilization is taken from us? And there's always the people who take the first opportunity to just toss it all aside and do whatever they want for them. And there's always the people, whether we're talking about apocalypse stories or like real crises, like hurricanes and, all the stuff we see, natural disasters, war. There's always the people who want to do right and hang on to their humanity and help others. And I'm always just fascinated by what makes us do that. And then COVID became that. It wasn't an apocalypse, obviously, but that people quickly, if we divided into camps so fast about who takes care of others, who's concerned about others, and who are like, oh, you're just being a pussy, to wear your mask or whatever. You're afraid. I'm not a sheep. And it's like, it was just so crazy to me how quickly that divide about, I'm just caring about my friends who are undergoing cancer treatment or my sick dad. That doesn't make me a sheep, but it was crazy to me. But that's, to me, that's always the answer of like, I always want to be on the side of the people who are trying to, like, if the world falls apart, I will be the one who's trying to build the new community somewhere. And I want those kinds of people around me. And we will always have to look out for the ones who aren't like that.
Yeah. You're looking for the helpers, right?
Yeah, totally, totally. And they always emerge. They're always there.
They are. They are. And that is that's something that I laughed through the whole thing as Vivian and Cooper bonded over The Walking Dead. And I remember watching disaster movies with you and
Yeah.
talking about the apocalypse, but it's something that struck me so hard about, and Cooper ended up, he was my favorite character.
Oh,
I connected with him so much. He wanted the world to end, and that struck a chord with me. Probably a lot of people, because we don't want the world to end. We don't want society to collapse. We don't want people to die, but we want to change, right? We
want
want,
that clean slate, that
yes,
start over,
yes, dramatic change from the way things are. And I think I really connected with that desire in him. But I think everybody has it, right? Everybody in the book had that.
Yeah, I think
How,
so.
how did you kind of get to that point with each of those characters? Finding out what they wanted and how they wanted to start over.
Yeah, well, I can never start the book, like start a serious revision. I don't even start a first draft unless I kind of know what are their motivations, what do they
Mm.
want? And then what they want, it gets quickly upended by the fact that they have to go into lockdown and they end up moving in together. But just and this is going to sound like such an unsatisfying answer, but it really is just in that discovery of the first draft, getting to know them and how they interact and what, just learning who they are. That feels like a lame answer. I'm sorry. But just kind of just, they all, they recognize it takes more time for some of them than others. They
Yeah.
recognize that they were better when they came together. And there's not a lot of time to dig into it, but that whole cicada thing with those brood cicadas and the epigraph poem, they started the book, all four of them, with kind of armor built and
Mhm.
shells on, way before COVID. And then but only the coming together are they able, like the cicadas, I know that's corny, but to like shed the shells and leave the shells behind and move forward as their more authentic selves. But the only thing that allowed them to do that was coming together, the friendships they formed, the community they built in that house.
I think that's wonderful. I think it's beautiful. And what I took from the cicadas is that they all finally got permission to be loud and
Yes.
to be themselves, because that's what the cicadas do, right? And they
Yep.
piss everybody off, but they are authentically what they are.
Yes. Yes. And Vivian has that line about, so much drama for such a short lifestyle, but that's us. That's us too. We have so
That's
much
us.
drama. Yep.
That is definitely us. Okay, well, we are about out of time, and I'm going to stop the recording in just a second here so I can say a proper goodbye to you. But on behalf of our book club, our, what did I say, Society of Badass Women Readers
Yeah.
or something. Thank you so much, and we really
Truly my pleasure. Thank you for picking my book.
thank you so much. Okay, I'll stop recording now.